So we have a low battery situation, so we'll try to get all the way through this one. So let's go ahead and start with, we just did cover this in class, so for you all, we'll go ahead and just sum it up again, that we see the core of Europe as being the offshore core of the British Isles and also of the mainland core, and we just figured out and distinguished the difference of the EU beginning in the mainland core and the offshore core as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So it's really good to distinguish that right now, and also know that the initiation of the EU happened with Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, also known as Benelux. And that is a huge central support area for the EU. And so we will begin with Germany. Germany is a very large country, lots of people. It has huge economic output. If you want some history of Europe, there were some very fierce tribes that were located in this area. These were the Anglo-Saxon tribes, and there were also peoples that were located on the British Isles. I have some ancestry from this area. My name is a Celtic name, and so my ancestry would originate from Wales. But like many people, if you had the ancestry of a people that was a native or these are native settlers of the British Isles, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, and then we have colonizers that came over from the mainland, and these are Anglo-Saxon tribes that were here in France and Germany, all along here, and you can see that it's very close. And there's a lot of history on this, and even a lot of myth. The Round Table and the mythology with King Arthur. There's a lot of really fascinating tales. There's Stonehenge, and lots of history there, lots of rich history. But the main thing to remember is that there was fighting, and there were people that came from here and colonized. And so we do have Ireland, and we have still Irish people and Scottish people that have kind of stayed up here now, and the Welsh people here. But this is kind of a history that can help us to understand a little bit that Anglo-Saxon people did originate from this area. So what was it like? We know that there were lots of tribes, and that Germany as a state is newer than France is as a state. France is very old, dating back to Roman times and even before that. Germany is relatively new. So what do we know about Germany for the world wars?
They started it.
Okay, well, yes, we know that the origination point, then there's a conflict that occurs, then there are allies that join, and then there's everybody in the world joins up on one side or another, and then we had World War I that was really about territory, and a lot of it happened in North Africa, and it was about colonizing and territories. And World War II, we know, what's the main thing that happened for World War II?
So, Germany struggled to rebuild?
Yes, and it was a struggle for territories, and there's a huge history. You can actually look this up online. We won't go all into World War II history, but overall, we know that Germany ended up surrendering and was economically punished, and really it ended up, this is what is really important, in the fracturing, the division of Europe. into East and West. And as we said before, the USSR, the Soviet Union at that time, was an ally with the United States and Western Europe, and so began to occupy some eastern, just to occupy eastern states. And in Germany's case, Germany was split, literally split in half into East and West. Now, there was help that came. There was a shattering, just a shattering of Europe, a terrible time. And Western Europe recovered much quicker. There was the Marshall Plan. There was assistance that came in. The Marshall Plan was assistance from the United States. And it was for Western Europe, not for Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe became occupied by Soviet forces. And tragically, at the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1991, this was very, very difficult for Eastern Europe, whose economies and politics were now in a shambles. There's a vacuum of power, and many times when there is a vacuum of power, then people come in and take over, and it's a difficult time. But Eastern Europe is rebuilding, and as I've said before, has huge potential, and there's so many exciting things going on now in Eastern Europe. And so during that World War, many, many buildings, beautiful cities in Europe were bombed. Some weren't. Places that cooperated more weren't bombed as much. And well, as we get into more individual countries, we can talk a little more about that. But overall, Germany, hugely productive. The highest production in the EU comes from Germany. So it's a fiercely strong economy. Now Europe in general has slowed in growth after the financial crash of 2008. Europe has far slowed growth, like other places in the world, just like the United States, and everywhere in the world was affected. Now we can look at France now, and we can compare a little bit. So which state is older?
France.
France. Which state has more people? Germany.